Some things could make a girl's heart race as much as a man's. They were huge, compressed, strong, fast, cunning, and violently scary beings. VA knew what was terrifying. What she hadn't expected was that terror could also be mesmerizing. VA pushed the candlestick deeper into her mouth, nearly dropping it again. She couldn't afford to let it fall. It would make noise, and noise was dangerous. Holding the lamp like this wasn't ideal, but she had no choice. Ventilation shafts were safer than the corridors, but they weren't foolproof. She needed her hands free. The vents were cold and claustrophobic, lined with filth and sand. VA wondered how a spaceship could harbor so much grime. The metal walls leached heat from her body, while the dust mingled with the sweat of fear and exertion, staining her bare skin. Her tattered clothes barely clung to her, the remnants of fabric brushing against the ducts that carried oxygen through the ship. The air smelled faintly of the creature she was evading, but there was no escaping it. The dim cone of light from the rod in her mouth was her only illumination. Whoever had built this ship hadn't bothered to install lighting in the HVAC system. Not that she could blame them. She was lucky to fit into the ducts at all. But her luck was running out. The light was fading, and the rod was nearly out of power. She needed to find another light source soon. Her hands were tightly wrapped around her makeshift spear. It was a 3-foot-long metal pole with a crudely sharpened tip, a relic of the ship's past repurposed for survival. It wasn't much, but it had kept her alive. She missed the reliability of the handgun on her hip, but the incompatible batteries she'd scavenged made it useless. VA crawled slowly and carefully, the spear in front of her illuminated by the waning light. The ventilation shaft groaned beneath her weight, and every sound made her freeze, holding her breath and listening. Most of the time, there was nothing, but sometimes there were noises, scrapes, echoes, and once the thing. When it found her, it had torn into the shaft, and she barely escaped. Now she approached another opening. The gate was closed, but she could open it easily. Not yet. She needed to be sure it was safe. Her heart pounded as she peered through the vent, angling the rod of light into the room below. The light revealed a thick, leather-clad leg, dark green, almost black. The creature stirred, its tail flicking lazily. It was massive. The stinger at the end of its 7-foot tail as thin as a needle, yet terrifyingly sharp. Was it asleep? She could only hope. VA inched forward, her spear scraping softly against the vent. She froze, every muscle tense, waiting for the creature to react. It didn't. After a moment, she crept past, her breath shallow, passing several more grates. One room was empty, another was dark, but the third was lit, with the door closed. It was the best she could hope for. VA pushed up the grate and slipped her head through, scanning the small, cramped room. It was empty. Slowly, she climbed out, lowering herself as quietly as possible. Her feet hit the floor with a soft thud. She waited, straining to hear any sounds. The room was sparse, a wardrobe, a cupboard, and little else. It didn't resemble the rooms on her ship. Her jaw clenched as anger bubbled up. 2 weeks. That's how long it had been since the Venka crew had abandoned her, leaving her for dead. She refused to die here, but starvation, being eaten alive, or freezing to death seemed inevitable. Her thirst had driven her into the vents in search of water. She set a small table beneath the vent, ensuring her escape route remained accessible, then headed to the tiny bathroom. Catching her reflection in the mirror, she froze. Her once blue skin was now dull, coated in grime. Her white hair hung in filthy tangles down her back, and her vivid violet eyes were sunken with exhaustion. Bruises and cuts marked her body, and her makeshift clothes, little more than torn fabric, clung to her like bandages. Her stomach throbbed where a mantis had stung her. She'd killed it just before the venom took effect, spending 4 agonizing hours paralyzed atop its corpse. The sting was the worst of her injuries, a constant, gnawing pain. She turned away, sparing only a fleeting glance at the shower. It worked, but she wasn't willing to risk her life for cleanliness. Instead, she filled her canteen at the sink, savoring the precious water. Then she heard it, a thud behind her. She spun, spear in hand. On the table beneath the vent crouched a small creature. Its yellow, slit-pupil eyes locked onto hers. Green scales covered its body, and its tail, tipped with a stinger, twitched ominously. It screamed a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that made VA's blood run cold. The creature coiled, ready to pounce. VA thrust her spear forward with all her strength. The sharpened metal pierced its chest, but not as deeply as she'd hoped. Its tough hide resisted, and the beast thrashed, knocking the spear from her hands. Desperation fueled her. She grabbed the weapon again, jabbing it into the creature's side. It screamed louder, the sound echoing through the halls. Others would hear. She had to kill it. She had to kill it now. The monster overcorrected when Vola tried to stab it again. It fell backwards, taking the table with it. Va was just starting to star around the table when she heard a tail hiss. The door behind her was opening. The big one must have woken up. It was going to tear her apart if she was lucky. If she was unlucky, it would sting her, then eat her while she was alive and paralyzed. She had one chance. Va turned and lunged, thrusting her spear with all the strength and speed she could muster. She dimly registered a large shape and aimed her sharpened rod for the center of it. The spear stopped. The creature had caught it, and Va stared at the thing. It wasn't what she'd expected. This was not a four-legged mass of claws and stingers. It was a two-armed biped like Va. If Va happened to be a mountain of muscle, the biped towered over Va. She was tall for a Phala, but she barely came up to its sternum. Its arms were bigger than VA's legs, and one meaty hand was clamped on VA's spear. She jerked it, but it might as well have been stuck in a steel vise. The biped stepped forward with its other hand, thrusting out a wide palm shoved into V's chest. Launching her across the tiny room, she landed on the cot, but the back of her head bounced off the metal bulkhead strong. He was so strong. He definitely tried to focus on the newcomer. Definitely not a monster, an alien. He wore a white tank, top black pants, a tool belt, and several bulky guns of foreign design. His skin was pale pink or maybe peach-colored. His hair was short and black. His jaw was thick. His eyes were dark and glittered with violence. He might be a monster. After all, he took her spear in one hand and made 2 long strides. The other monster had just climbed onto the upended table. Frills extended screeching, and the biped slammed the sharpened rod down through its skull with terrific force. The little one fell. Silent muscles rippled as the alien jerked the spear out of the creature. He slapped a hand on the door panel. The door hissed closed. The alien turned to Va, and she fumbled for her L gun. Maybe he wouldn't know she was out of charge. She pointed it at the monstrous hulk. The biped shifted the sharpened rod to his left hand. He held out his right. His voice was a low, smooth rumble. "Come with me if you want to live." Va stared at him, a useless gun still pointed at his chest. The man held her gaze seriously for 2 seconds. Then he giggled and clamped a hand over his mouth, trying to keep himself quiet as his face contorted in laughter. Oh man, I've always wanted to say that Va continued to stare at the crazy giant. He got his laughter under control and frowned at her. "Can you understand me?" He kept his voice. Low, Va opened her mouth, but she didn't know what to say. The biped's concern deepened. "Do you not have a translator?" Microbes, Va felt herself nod. Translator. Microbes, the giant had them, which meant he was a known sapient, a member of the galactic community. It didn't make him safe, but he was probably less dangerous than the things outside. At least she hoped he was if he meant her harm. She didn't think she could stop him. Who? What? What, have you never seen a human before? Huh? The man smiled. It was a nice smile, but Va was not reassured she'd seen how casually the human had dispensed. Violence makes sense. You're only the second F. I've met the names Mitch. Donnelly, your Vala was still staring. You're so big. The human chuckled again. "You're not the first girl to say that to me." He flipped the sharpened rod in the air and caught it, holding it out to Va handle first here. "If that L's gun worked, you'd have been using it." If Vala took the Profa spear, the human had blood on his hand from where he caught the tip of it. He wiped it on his pants. "What are you doing here?" she asked, rescuing you apparently. The man's eyes roved around the room, taking everything in Vinta didn't mention survivors. "When he told me these coordinates. Are there more of you?" Va shook her head, Vinta. She hissed that Pidu stranded. "Us here stole my ship. I'm the only one left." I'm sorry to hear that the mountain of muscle sounded sincere. He might have said something else, but there was a scrabbling sound at the door. It hissed open. Va hopped off the bunk and clutched her spear. It was one of the creatures, probably the one Va had seen in the other room. Its head was higher than vast. The thing frail snapped at it, letting out a terrible high-pitched scream. Then there were 3 sharp cracks of thunder. The creature fell dead. The human had one of his guns pointed at it. Smoke whisked out of the barrel. The man swore so much for doing this. "The quiet way you got a name, little lady Va." She told him her ears were ringing. The human's gun was loud. "Nice to meet you," Va Mitch dug into one of his pockets and held out a pair of objects. "Here, take these hearing protection." Va took the little pellets. She noticed the human had ones just like them stuck in his ears. She put the plugs in her ears as well. They let out a faint hum, then fell silent. They double as a cow link. The man told her in case we get separated in the distance. Vol could hear the high-pitched squeals of more monsters. "Stay close. We've got to move." The human who stepped into the hallway. His steps were frighteningly silent for such a hulking mass of a man. Vol followed. The alien was going out of his way to be non-threatening, even turning his back to her. After handing her a spear, she still wasn't sure she could trust him, but she did not want to be left behind frightening. As Mitch was, he was the only chance Va had to get off this god's-forsaken ship. "Why did you come here?" Va asked again, and Salvage the human explained. "Humans are pretty new to the galactic stage. Our government pays a pretty penny for alien technology. The ship will be one hell of a payday. Once we cleared out the Skreeling. Was that the name of the monsters? You know what they are. A bioweapon." Mitch stalked down the corridor. The hallway was dark, and the human turned on a light rod under the barrel of his gun. Va pulled out her own light rod, thankful. She didn't have to carry it in her teeth this time. Their real name is just a series of letters and numbers, but we call them scalings because of the sound they make. This tub's a Bruck vessel. They like to drop scalings on PRFT worlds. Let the bastards wipe out the locals. Only sometimes the critters get loose and eat everyone. Va played her light over the man's back. It was just as meaty as the rest of him. She'd never seen such broad shoulders. "How do you know that?" she asked while staring at his arms. She felt her cheeks flush when she realized this was no time for arousal. There were things trying to eat her. She made herself move the light and looked behind her, more screeching ahead of them. Closer now. They tried it on one of our colonies. Mitch explained it was our first contact with an alien species. He frowned down at Va and her spear. "That stick's not going to do you much good when things get hairy. You know how to use a firearm." "I don't know," Va admitted. "Is it like a gun?" Pretty close to the human let go of his long gun, letting it hang from the sling attached to him. He pulled a smaller weapon off of his tool belt. "This is a pistol, .45 caliber ACP. It's got 8 shots in the clip. There's a round chambered and there's no safety, so you can just point it and pull the trigger." Va took the gun. It had looked small in Mitch's hands. It didn't feel small in hers. It was heavier than she expected. 2 pounds, maybe a little more. "What does it do?" "It's kinetic," said Mitch. "Metal projectiles launched at high speed through chemical explosions. Keep your fingers off the trigger until it's time to shoot. I don't want any accidents." 8 shots, Va swallowed, and her L gun had been able to fire 30 before needing a new power cell. Then again, she needed almost 10 shots to put down a Skreeling. The human's weapon was probably much more powerful. The squeals increased in volume. 3 monsters burst out of a side. Corridor Va raised her pistol, but the human was in the way. She squeezed to the side. Trying to get a beat on things she needn't have bothered, Mitch raised his weapon and squeezed off 6 shots in 3 seconds. All of the scalings fell. 2 of them were still alive. Mitch shot them again. He hadn't even broken stride. It looks like we're doing things in a fun way. The human was speaking under his breath, but his voice was funneling into VA's earplugs. "What are we doing?" she asked. She looked around the dark corridor, trying to get her bearings. "Is this the way to your ship?" "Nope." Mitch pointed his weapon at any open doors as he stalked down the corridor. His bulk took up most of the hallway, and his head was dangerously close to brushing the ceiling. The way he moved was both frightening and sensual. Smooth, graceful motion muscles playing against each other in perfect sync as he stalked forward, like some ancient primal predator. "I said before we need to clear out the scalings. That's what I'm going to do to clear out the Vahist. Are you insane? There are hundreds of them. Thousands probably." Mitch agreed. Things breed fast. They were designed for the man spun around his gun, weaved over VA's head. She whipped around to see what he was pointing at more. At least 5 coming fast. Va raised her gun. She pulled the trigger and the .45 jumped in her hand. The human fired his own weapon. He put the screaming down with careful shots, spaced half a second apart. Va helped. She used all 8 shots when the last one died. Mitch pulled a cartridge out of his gun and put a new one in. She turned to Mitch, but the human had his back to her. He was shooting again. More scalings coming from the front. Mitch mowed them down. He checked behind them again, then swept his light up and down the darkened corridor. He held out a hand. Gunva passed over her empty pistol. "You can't possibly think you can kill them all yourself," she told him. "I don't need to have the human reload the pistol and hand it back. I was on my way to engineering when I heard you fighting the little one. Scalings need air just like everyone else. I'm going to shut down life support, then we'll head back to my ship and spend a few quiet days, waiting for them to asphyxiate and or freeze to death. How do you know they won't turn life support back on Va?" "They're smart," Mitch told her, "but they're not that smart." The human shrugged his massive shoulders. "Probably if they start manipulating technology, I'll have to come up with a new plan." He fired around into an open doorway. A squealing crashed into his legs, nearly knocking him over. He shot it, but it was already dead. The human moved on, complaining about tiny corridors. It took a little under 10 minutes to reach engineering. Scalings were still coming in 1s and 2s. At one point, a little one burst out of a vent and nearly landed on Mitch. Va shot it in midair. She was proud of that one, where she would be once her legs stopped shaking and crawling through the vents had been bad. This was so much worse. How could the human be so calm when Mitch slapped the door panel? The entrance hissed open. Engineering was brightly lit. Thank the gods. A wide space crammed full of machinery. The floors and walls were spattered with old blood and smeared with excrement. The smell was awful, but there were no bodies. The Sings had either eaten them all or carried them away. The human spent a few precious moments, sweeping his gaze and his gun over the room. No monsters. It made sense, F supposed. There was nothing left to eat here. She'd seen Sings eat all sorts of things, clothes, furniture, people, but not metal. Mitch. She closed the door and hustled for a control station to cover me. He said this won't take long. Vala stood close to the human. The acrid scent of gun smoke clung to him, but beneath it he smelled good. Really good soap and a hint of sweat mixed with the natural scent of his skin. She liked it a lot. She caught herself staring at him again and made herself go back to watching the vents and the doors she wished. She smelled that good. She probably stinks worse than engineering. It was quiet at first. I heard nothing but the human fingers typing at the control station. Then she heard the human swearing under his breath. The translator microbes were letting him read the language, but that didn't mean he knew how to navigate the computer. He'd been messing with it for 5 minutes when the screeching started. This wasn't the screeching of screaming on the hunt. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm Mitch heard too. Oh, that's not good. What's happening? Vi asked, her heart having finally slowed down. After a few idle minutes now, it picked up again. We've been dealing with individuals and small groups. Up till now, said the human, the screamings don't know. What gunfire is the noise that will draw hunters if they're close, but the rest won't bother a trail of dead bodies. On the other hand, he scaled, still typing they're not sentimental. But they'll recognize a threat to the hive. We need to hurry this along a chill. Swept down V's legs. They're talking. Aren't they coordinating? Mitch confirmed the way back's going to be a lot more dangerous. The scalings were getting louder, Mitch. Typed faster V's tension rage. Ed, 2 minutes later, the human made a fist and got it. The soft, omnipresent hum of the HVAC system wound down. Let's go. Va started for the door. Mitch grabbed her arm. Not that way, he let go quickly. Va rubbed where he grabbed her. She didn't think he'd been trying to hurt her, but his grip was so strong. They're massing up. They'll get a few hundred together and follow our trail. Swarm us like ants. Mitch, walk to a different hatch. We need a different route to the airlock. Do you know another way? Va asked her. The whole body was clenched. Yeah. Mitch slapped the door panel and readied his assault rifle. The door opened and nothing jumped out at them. Mitch flicked on his flashlight and stepped through. There should be a ladder somewhere down this corridor. We need to go up 5 decks. The human didn't walk this time. He jogged, rifle at the ready. The pace was brisk, but Va suspected he was going slower than he would if he wasn't worried about her. Keeping up, Va was grateful. She couldn't have gone much faster. She was starved, dehydrated, beaten, and exhausted. Also, her legs were shorter than his. It took just under a minute to find an access ladder Mitch played his flashlight up at. It then ran it over the corridor. Satisfied, he let his rifle drop and pulled out a pistol, a much bigger one than Vass. He pulled another flashlight off his belt and clipped it to the gun. This is going to stink, he muttered. He took a breath and put a hand on the ladder, watching our backs. If something gets me, go up 5 decks and follow the hallway in the direction we came from. It should be a straight shot to the airlock. He started to climb, and Mitch led the way with his pistol, squeezing through the opening to the next floor. Va could see why he was worried if there was a squealing waiting. The human was probably dead when his feet climbed past the opening and started to clamber up behind him. They were lucky. Nothing was waiting. The human stopped at each floor, poking his head and gun out before climbing the rest of the way. The whole climb took barely a minute, but V's blood was pounding in her ears. By the end of it, she dearly wished she could be using the air shafts again. She would have if that hulking mass of a human wasn't too big to fit in one. Okay, Mitch, huffed quietly. It's a straight shot down the hallway. Go! I'll be right behind you. Do you have many more mags? Va asked. She only had 2 more bullets in her pistol. No! The human admitted he handed over his other handgun. It was bigger and heavier than the .45 Take the Deagle. It's got 8 rounds more recoil than the .45, but it shouldn't be too bad. Va nodded. The scree of the monsters was closer. Now too close. Now go Mitch. Hefted his assault, rifle run. Va ran. She started with a pistol in each fist, but the Deagle was too unwieldy. She tucked the .45 into her tool belt so she could keep both hands on the bigger gun. Its flashlight was brighter than the old light, rod, illuminating a white stretch of the corridor. In a cone of blinding light, Mitch jogged easily behind her, the butt of his rifle tucked into his shoulder. The squealing was calling from all around them. Now, it didn't sound like they were on this deck yet, but it was only a matter of time. They'd been jogging for over a minute when Mitch Curse's gun boomed, spared a glance, and nearly soiled herself. Scales were spilling down the hallway toward them. Fast too. Fast, Mitch emptied his mag into them, reloaded, then scooped Va up. He slung her over his shoulder and sprinted for all. He was worth even carrying as the human moved like the wind. It wouldn't be enough. The scalings were almost on them. Va raised the deagle. It was hard to aim. Mitch was fast, but he was not a smooth ride. Va squeezed off a shot. She missed, the gun kicked up. She forced it down and tried again. Another missed the lead. Skrieling took up most of the hallway. It was so big. V was surprised. It could fit through the ladder hatch. It was only 12 T away when her third shot caught it in the foreleg. The monster tumbled. The fourth shot missed again, but killed one of the ones behind the thing. Va fired off all 8 shots. She had 2 more scalings. She didn't know if she killed them. She tried to tuck the gun into her tool belt, but ended up dropping it. Va swore as she pulled out the .45 and used the last 2 shots. Mitch stumbled to a halt. They were at the airlock. He dropped Va like a sack of laundry and typed hurriedly into the door control. Then he spun around and unloaded his assault rifle. Va heard the airlock cycling. She didn't know if they'd hold out long enough for the door to open. The corridor was full of screaming. As far as I could see, their scream would be deafening. If she didn't have the humans' hearing protection. Mitch's gun ran out of ammo. He let it drop, pulling his last gun off his back. It was a little shorter than his assault rifle, with a thicker barrel. The human was huffing and growling. Come on, a new gun, boomed Mitch, jerking on the barrel. A big red casing ejected. He fired again and again. Finally, the airlock hissed open and Va scrambled inside. Mitch followed, unloading the big gun into a tide of claws and stingers, and Death Va found the inner door panel and activated it. The last thing she saw before the hatch hissed shut was a skrieling in mid-leap. The thing slammed into the closing door and fell back. The airlock finished hissing, shot Mitch, brushed Va aside, and typed into the panel. Sorry, he gasped and got to lock this in his chest. Heaved as the human gulped huge breaths of air. The panel beeped at him, and the man slumped. He sat down with his back against the bulkhead for 15 seconds. He just sat there and gasped. Then he started to laugh. Oh man! Mitch's face split into a grin. What a rush I haven't done. Anything like that in years you thought that was fun. Va stared at the man. Nothing like almost dying to make you feel alive, said the madman. He hauled himself to his feet. Come on, let's get you cleaned up and get some food in you. It's been a long day. Mitch took Va to his quarters. It was big, like the rest of him, with tall ceilings and lots of space. He pulled a first aid kit out from under his bunk, then pointed at some lockers bolted onto the wall. There's clothes in there. I don't have anything in your size, but help yourself. He pointed to another hatch bathrooms there. The plumbing on this boat is top-notch, so take your time in the shower. I'm going to go set you up in your own set of quarters and give you some privacy. Then he laughed. Vala spent a long time in the shower. Terror and grief washed over her as hot water peeled away the grime. It was over. She was safe. She found herself huddled on the floor, bawling her eyes out as soothing hot wetness rained down. She was safe. Eventually, she cried herself out. The water was still hot. Mitch hadn't been joking about the plumbing. Va scrubbed and scrubbed, scouring her skin and hair with soaps that smelled like humans. When she was finally finished, she pulled out the first aid kit and slathered disinfectant and bang bandages all over herself. She went through Mitch's drawers, eventually settling on a simple white shirt. It was so big. She could wear it like a dress. She borrowed the human's comb and painstakingly brushed the snarls out of her hair. She borrowed his toothbrush too. It left a minty flavor in her mouth. She found Mitch waiting in the hallway outside his eyebrows when he saw her. Oh wow, said the human. You clean up good. Clean up. Va frowned. She didn't think she'd done any housework. It's a human expression, Mitch explained, means you're pretty. Oh, Va flushed. Thank you. The human led her to the kitchen and made her food pancakes. He called them Mitch and covered them with melted butter in a sticky sweet syrup called maple. They were amazing. She would have loved them. Even if she wasn't half-starved, they chatted while they ate. She told him the story of her doomed salvage mission and Vincent's betrayal. He shared some anecdotes about his life as a fellow tech hunter when she'd eaten her fill Va dropped. The question she'd been meaning to ask, "Are all humans as big as you?" Mitch chuckled. "Well, most of us are bigger than you. You're a tiny thing." His smile was infectious. We were pretty shocked at how small everyone was when we got into space. The smile widened into a grin, but no, I'm pretty big. Definitely above average. I see she was staring at his arms again. She tore her eyes away. Then Yawn the human yawned himself, stretching well. "I guess I should show you your quarters. You look like you could sleep for a week." He stood and stood too. "No." She told him she should be sleeping. She was clean, full, and safe, and exhausted too. She wasn't ready to sleep, yet the need to sleep was superseded by another, more primal need. No, Mitch frowned. "Take me to your quarters." Va demanded the human had stoked this fire. It was his responsibility to quench it. The human blinks. "What takes me to your quarters?" Va repeated. She slipped out of the oversized shirt and stepped closer to him. She put a hand on his chest. Her smile was as predatory as any squealing. "I want to see what else you have that's big."